Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And on a dope-ass mic, this is Nick Saveri.
That's right. New microphones, a new time for the show. Nick, we got a great show for everybody tonight. Joining us is going to be a legendary producer that has done some fantastic documentaries. Nick, Cocaine Cowboys, have you seen it?
I saw it for the first time a couple weeks ago from your recommendation.
Exactly.
Unbelievable.
What's such a good documentary. He's produced some legendary ones. ESPN's 30 for 30, The U, Broke. As you see, for those of you watching on video, Nick is wearing a University of Miami shirt for 30 for 30. But he's also done documentaries in the political landscape, 537 Votes, which is available now on HBO Max, about the 2000 election and the recount that happened in Florida. Also did Screwball, which is on Netflix now streaming. That's about A-Rod and the biogenesis saga that happened back in 2010, 11, 12, and all the baseball players that tested positive for HGH. And that's legendary producer, award-winning producer, Alfred Spellman is going to be joining us tonight to really talk not only about his career, that him and Billy Corben started Rakontur Productions, and they've done so many great documentaries. But, you know, a lot of people don't know, Nick, what a producer does. You know, we had Jason Eyre on, who directed The Last Dance and a bunch of other ESPN 30 for 30s. And, you know, we talked a lot from the direction angle and the way Jason crafted some of these projects. And tonight we're really going to get a little bit more into the weeds of what producers do and what Alfred's role really is on a lot of these projects. And also some of the great stories that have come out of Miami-Dade, where him and Billy are from, and just some of the great stories that Florida tells, you know. I'm very excited to talk to Alfred tonight.
Yeah, we get a chance to hear about his just professional growth. We get a chance to hear about something I'm particularly interested in is collaboration. You know, for our fans, for listeners of the show, you know, forget Alfred for a moment, forget Billy, just thinking about like two people who work really well together and the fruits of their labor are things that we've all experienced in some form or another.
Right.
What does it take to get that? And hopefully people coming out tonight get a chance to understand what it means to be in a really supportive, collaborative relationship, and how does that really help you professionally?
No, that's really well said, because, you know, you think a lot about, and everyone sees the credits, right? And they see the last person's name that pops in. It's always, you know, directed by Billy Corben. And you're just like, what about these other producers, you know, or people, the editors that worked on these projects? And then how do they come up with conceptually these stories? You know, Jason told us in that episode about Andre the Giant, how he told the story of the person, not so much the wrestler, right? And how him and his team, the same thing with the Last Dance documentary, talking about this was an underdog team. You know, Michael Jordan was, you know, a little known draft pick. So tonight we really get to dive into those stories, because some of these documentaries, especially 537 Votes, which just came out recently, about the 2000 election, a lot of people are comparing that to what happened present day. You know, a president that didn't concede, votes that weren't tallied in one state until December 16th. There was lawsuits. And it's like, how do you come up with telling this story, you know, and it happened 20 years ago, and keeping it fresh to what's happening in present day? And in that documentary, Roger Stone's in that documentary, and obviously he's been in the political landscape for so long. And then Screwball, which I've told you to watch numerous times, Nick, about A-Rod and the biogenesis lab down here in Miami. You know, it's done through the dramatization of kids as actors, acting out the parts of A-Rod and Tony Bosch. And it's just really well done. So like, even selecting something like that and then putting it out there, you know, into the universe. Like, I'm just so fascinated by some of that stuff. And I think a lot of people don't see really how the sausage is made. And we're going to get into that tonight with Alfred. All right, joining us now, he's an award-winning producer that has worked on some great documentaries, from Cocaine Cowboys to 537 Votes, one of my favorite that's streaming now on HBO Max, and also Screwball on Netflix, the story of A-Rod and the biogenesis scandal that happened back in the early 2010s. And that is Alfred Spellman. Alfred, Mike Leon, Nick Saveri, thanks for jumping on with us tonight.
Thanks for the invite, guys. Great to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Alfred, you know, I want to get a little bit more into your story. Tell us a little bit about, for our audience who's maybe unfamiliar with, you know, the work that you and Billy Corben have done. But tell us a little bit about how you guys knew each other, your upbringing, and then how you got into producing.
Sure. So I was born in Miami Beach in 1978, and I like to tell everybody that the Miami Beach that I was born in is much different than the Miami Beach you could possibly imagine today. The year I was born, the median age in Miami Beach was 67. It was one of the few cities on earth where there were more people dying than being born every year. So it was essentially a retirement community. And that's what Miami Beach was through most of the late 70s and into the 80s when things started to change a little bit. So growing up in Miami Beach was like a really odd experience, being a young kid surrounded by elderly people. And so and being an only child, I started, I was around adults a lot. So I enjoyed listening to stories that older people would tell. And, a lot of the people who were around at Miami Beach then were Holocaust survivors, old elderly Jews who lived down in the old motels in South Beach, living out the remaining years. And so, the storytelling that went on during that period was just fascinating. And so I think that's probably where I got my curiosity for storytelling and for talking to older people and hearing, and listening to history, seeing how history applies to present day issues. So that was basically growing up in Miami Beach in the 1980s. And Billy and I met in TV production class in ninth grade at Highland Oaks Middle School in North Miami Beach. Our TV production teacher, Mrs. Spicer, kind of saw something in both of us and said, "You guys need to work together." And so we started working together in TV production class. And through high school, we made several short films, and we both ended up at the University of Miami and taking a leave of absence in 2000 to make our first documentary, which is called Raw Deal, A Question of Consent, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival the following year. So that's kind of the origin story.
You're obviously, you come to us tonight, producer is, the name that's always applied to you, in these projects. Was production what you were setting out to get into in filmmaking, and also just in general for our audience? Tell us what is the role of a producer in filmmaking?
So the way that I describe the role of the producer is essentially the CEO. The producer is there to help the director realize his creative vision and to be able to then commercially exploit the project. So, really when Billy and I started working together, we have a third partner, David Cypkin, who's worked with us since we were 15 as well. The three of us all kind of focused in on the skill sets that we were best at. I'm super organized and a detail-oriented person, kind of like to manage projects. I tell everybody producing a movie is like developing a building in real estate. It's constructing buildings, dealing with the subcontractors and the supplies and the materials and making sure everything gets where it should be at the right time, and kind of focusing on the big picture while also being able to deal with the smaller logistical details. So that's really, so the producer does everything basically. I carry equipment when I have to carry equipment, and I write the call sheets when no one else is writing the call sheets. And so you end up doing basically whatever needs to be done to get the project done.
Alfred, I was telling you this off air. I'm in Miami. My wife is from Miami, a Coral Park grad. You're in Miami Beach. All of these documentaries that you guys have produced tell this story as Miami, as the backdrop or the lifeblood of it, from Screwball, Cocaine Cowboys, and even what happened with the 2000 recount. What is it in the water in Miami that produces some great stories? What is going on in this city? I mean, people read the news and they see Florida man, but what is it about Miami that produces some of these great stories?
So I think at the end of the day, Miami is a border town, right? We are a place where people pass through. People are always coming, they're going, they're leaving, they're returning, they're just arriving. So like any border town, like any Casablanca, Miami has its share of characters. And, we're a very young city. The city of Miami was founded in 1896. So we're just over 100 years old. And so we're not Boston, we're not Philadelphia. We don't have families who have been here for 200 years. We don't have kind of the institutions that other communities have that have been built generation on generation on generation. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Sometimes those things create kind of a stasis where you're not able to kind of progress or advance or kind of create a caste system, which isn't the case in Miami. As long as you have the money and you're ready to have a good time, Miami is open for you. And so it's always historically been a wide open city. It's been a wide open city when it came to organized crime, when it came to the original mafia out of the Northeast. Miami was considered, when South Florida was considered, one of those places where no one family laid claim. It was considered open territory. And it's been that way since the era of Meyer Lansky, and continues to be that day today. It is just a wide open town for every sort of hustle and every sort of dreamer you can imagine.
One thing that's amazing about your films is accessibility. In isolation, when you mention to someone, "Hey, you up for watching a documentary?" Like sometimes there's a reservation, right? But when I think of the work that you and Billy have done, it's every single project I've seen. It's just like you're just drawn in, and there's something about the city of Miami, as Mike speaks to. But in general, what's sort of in the secret sauce for you both in telling these kinds of stories that people kind of get hooked into, like they're like fiction?
Well, you got to remember, I mean, we're 42. We're from the generation when you said documentary, it was the teacher wheeling in the VCR on the cart, and you're going to have to watch some terrible educational films. So, when we were growing up, documentary was like, it meant homework, it meant PBS, it meant boring, it meant, educational, certainly. And so when we started to make documentaries, it was right around the time of the first, the reality television boom in the early zeros. Survivor had just launched. Big Brother. So you had kind of people getting accustomed to watching reality all of a sudden because digital video took over, high definition video took over, and so it looked good, and it looked, it looked like a format on which you could tell stories, not just report news like video used to be. So our approach really was, we said, when we decided to make Cocaine Cowboys, we said, okay, we're going to make a gangster movie. Okay, when we make documentaries, we always look for the narrative genre analog, right? Like documentary isn't a genre of film because documentaries can be dramas, they can be comedies, they could be thrillers, they could be musicals, they could be any sort of genre that exists in dramatic film. So what we always like to do is to try to figure out what the genre is that we want to tell. So Cocaine Cowboys is a gangster movie. We said, how would Martin Scorsese tell a drug story like this? Up till that point, drug stories were always good guys, bad guys, right? Cops, robbers, the white hats versus the black hats. And so drug stories, crime, drug stories in particular, in terms of documentaries, were always told from the perspective of the DEA or the prosecutor or the cops. So we said, we're going to tell the story of how this city profited and benefited from this enormous drug trade that made Miami its headquarters in the late 70s. And that was, that wasn't a theory that the, Chamber of Commerce endorsed. Nobody really kind of concluded that until we made Cocaine Cowboys. Now it's kind of like perceived wisdom in a way. Yeah, Miami was built on the back of modern Miami, we know, went from God's waiting room to America's Riviera because of the cocaine trade. So Cocaine Cowboys is a great example of us kind of honing in on a genre and trying to make that in the documentary form. Our recent documentary Screwball that we made about the Alex Rodriguez, the biogenesis steroid scandal that led to the downfall of Alex Rodriguez. And what we said there, we said, oh, this is a Coen Brothers movie, right? If the Coen Brothers ever made a documentary, these are the characters that would have to be in this Coen Brothers movie. So we said, okay, we have to steer right into it. It's a heist movie, right? It's not a sports documentary like we've made before. This is a heist movie. And so we're going to tell it with a little comedic flair, a little fantastic flair. We're going to cast kids, 9-year-old children, to do these reenactments. So, we did a backyard fighting doc called Dogfight. That was an 80s action movie. We said that's like, that's kind of the genre analog is a 1980s, big action movie. So we went with a big orchestral score for it. So all of our films kind of are dictated by that cinematic type of storytelling where we try to find the appropriate genre analog.
It's funny that you just mentioned Screwball because my wife's entire family knows Tony Bosch's family. Like I mentioned, she went to Coral Park and her dad went to Columbus. And so like just those connections. So I wanted to stay on Screwball for a minute, just as an example of one of the docs. Like you touched about the kids doing the dramatizations. When you guys are conceptualizing this stuff and then you're shooting it, is there any point where you're just like, I don't think this is going to work at all? Or has there ever been that moment where you're just like, I don't know if I can have a kid that looks exactly like Alex Rodriguez at age 10 play Alex Rodriguez, because it is a serious story. Tony Bosch was selling drugs to kids, and underage kids that were getting their parents' consent, some legally, some not. So like, it's such a serious story, but then you chose children for it. I'm curious the thought process behind that and take people through how that gets storyboard and conceptualized if you can.
Sure. So there's a perfect example of limitations breeding creativity. We had a situation where we had a story that essentially is narrated by Tony Bosch, Porter Fisher, and and Jerome Hill, the agent, the Florida Department of Health agent. And when Tony and Porter are telling these stories, they're telling a very personal story. This is a story of somebody's files being stolen from their office, or they're at their house. This isn't like Cocaine Cowboys or The U, where there's a lot of archival footage. So as Tony and Porter are telling you these stories, we're thinking, oh boy, we have a problem. What are you going to see? What are you going to see while they're telling you these stories? There's no B-roll for any of this. This is a very unique, individualized story. So we said, well, we're going to have to shoot recreations. And so that was kind of the first step into realizing, okay, how are we going to solve this problem? And you're right, tonally, it is a very serious subject. There was, in fact, Oscar-nominated doc Icarus that just premiered on Netflix and premiered at Sundance the year before, which is a very serious telling of a steroid scandal. We said, well, okay, there are other ways to approach the storytelling other than just telling a straight thriller or just a straight drama. So, that was a case where we said, okay, we're going to do this. We've never done this before. We've never shot reprise for anything ever before. We're going to do it with all kids who are going to have to lip sync dialogue. And it's still an indie film. So we're doing it on an indie film budget. We're going to do it at as many of the actual locations that will allow us in. So we shot at Live. We shot at the Ritz-Carlton in Key Biscayne. We shot at the Sports Grill. So we went to the real places. And it was a tightrope, and it was terrifying, because we had 10 days to shoot. We had all of these kids, and if we didn't nail it, it would be garbage. The whole concept would you can't half step something like that. You have to go full on, and you have to make it work and sell it each and every recreation that you do. So it was ballsy. It was probably the scariest 10 days of production we've ever had. It was the most money we've ever spent per day on a shoot, and praying that it doesn't rain, praying that everyone shows up and knows their lines, and you get it done. It was a terrifying proposition.
No, it was very well done. It's one of my favorites. I love it.
Thank you.
You mentioned another project that I'm always. It's funny. A lot of these, stand out to me as some of my favorite pieces. I'm representing the U today, although.
All right, very good.
Mike and I are actually Rutgers graduates, so our exposure to the University of Miami is
was the U whooping up on us.
Exactly.
I did radio back then for our college. It's like I get to see the games up front and see basically, the Hurricanes,
the talent disparity,
through Piscataway, New Jersey.
Yeah.
But in seeing that, something I thought about when I watched the U and the U Part 2 was. The wondering I had was what made the University of Miami really essentially the beginnings of the modern college football team, in the sense like there's an aura there. Like we think about it now, obviously with Alabama and generally teams in the SEC, but from the work you and Billy did, what made the U really kind of bring college football into the 1980s and becoming a modern sport?
Well, it was really taking that Muhammad Ali attitude, attitudes that you generally saw in individual sports. You might have said, maybe you talk about somebody like maybe a John McEnroe in tennis, probably in the late 70s, early 80s, with that kind of edgier attitude, and Reggie Jackson, obviously, the New York Yankees, probably during that period that you could point to, but. Bringing that attitude to an entire team to basically make obviously you have the Oakland Raiders, who brought their own aura in pro football. So, this was probably the closest analog to that, right? I mean, you basically brought that level of swagger and hype to a game that was, I think at that point there was still that level of, well, these are amateurs. There's a level of respect. This is a different type of game. These aren't professional. Sportsmanship is paramount. Kind of an old school ethic to that UM kind of demolished in the 1980s, and whether that was things like running up the score or any of the dancing or any of the traditions that they that they basically blew away. We see it happen in Major League Baseball today. With the divide between the old school and the new school in terms of bat flips and things like that. So I think every sport has had to deal with that along the way. But the Hurricanes certainly did it first in college football.
Alfred, I want to ask you about the latest doc that came out, 537 Votes, which is available now on HBO Max. It's fantastically done. I got a two-part question because a lot of people wrongfully are conflating what happened in 2000 to what happened in 2020, especially with a president not conceding until mid-December, with an election being contested, but that was in one state, and what happened, with the Republicans that were marching to, get them to stop counting the votes. When you guys were doing this documentary, was the intention for it to come out around the political cycle? And then
Yes.
It was okay. So I had a feeling, but but did you think that dropping that documentary and then what's transpired over the last 4 months would happen? And what do you think about the people that are conflating the two? They literally are not the same thing. And I would love for you to explain that to people.
Sure. So 537 came about. We were sitting in the office in August of 2019. Me, Billy, Dave, and our assistant. I remember as clear as day. We're sitting around the office. And we were talking, we said, we felt that every American had an obligation to do more in 2020 than they've ever done previously for a presidential election. And so we were thinking, well, what were we going to do? How are we going to support an effort to get out the vote? Are we going to knock on doors? Are we going to phone back? We said, well, we started talking about the 2000 election, and our assistant at the time was born in 1990. So she was 10 at the time. We said, well, what do you remember of 2000? She said, I don't really remember too much, or, the hanging chads, she knew a couple of the buzz. I said, well, you know how close it was? And she said, no. I said, well, 105 million people voted in 2000, and the entire election came down to 537 votes, and her jaw dropped. And I said, oh, well, this is interesting. So Billy and I looked at each other. We said, well, how many Americans were born between, say, 1990 and 2002? Because if you're born in 2002, you would have been 18 and eligible to vote for the first time. And the numbers astounded us. It was 54 million Americans, which meant to us that 54 million Americans had no firsthand memory of the 2000 election and how close it was. And, having heard, so many people say over, oh, does my vote really count? Why do I bother? Well, if you think your vote doesn't count, you don't know what happened in the year 2000. So we said, we're going to go out, we're going to make this documentary about the 2000 election to remind everyone, basically like a stealth get out the vote documentary. Like, if you think your vote doesn't count, hear this. And what we realized quickly is we needed to tell the story of 2000 from a different perspective, because the movie Recount had been done. There, everybody remembers hanging chads and how crazy it was in Florida. But what actually happened? And the more we drilled into it, the more we realized there was this connection between the Elian Gonzalez custody saga that happened at the beginning of the year and the election that happens at the end. And what we realized was that Dade County essentially decided the election that year. Both because of the huge vote swing as a result of the Elian Gonzalez situation, and then as a result of the stopping of the count of 10,750 potential undervotes that had gone uncounted in the initial machine count. So those two events we decided to fuse together, and we said, well, who are the key players who are common to both stories, and how do we do? And so eventually what we settled on is we were going to tell the story of 1 year in the life of Miami-Dade County, starting from the beginning of January, essentially through the end of the year, and how the events in this one county, in kind of like this butterfly effect kind of way, this one county changed the course of history as a result. And so, and that's kind of a common theme in Screwball as well. The idea of things that happen in South Florida, things that get hatched here, whatever schemes or frauds or crimes get hatched in Florida, somehow, some way, in these kind of big national and international stories, have a way of impacting them. And so similar to Screwball, the election of 2000 was decided right here in Miami-Dade County. So that's why we decided to make the documentary. And the goal was to have it out right before the election, which we luckily were able to do. And I had no idea that things would have unfolded the way that they did. I was glad on election night that we weren't down to one state. Could you imagine what would have happened this year if it came down to just one state? I mean, things got crazy over, essentially a landslide, 7 million vote spread.
Right.
If it were down
6
to
states too.
6 states.
Right.
So it's remarkable that it's turned out this way. Unfortunately, it turned out to be more prescient than I think we had even dreamed of, but it was a cautionary tale. And of course, it's one of those only Miami stories that, we just have to tell.
We've been talking about projects that, got greenlit, that got the screen, that we've all obviously seen. Just shifting gears for a minute. What is it, what are some stories that didn't quite pass the smell test for you and Billy, that stayed on paper and didn't go any further than that? And what kept them staying on paper?
Well, I'll tell you my favorite story, which I haven't told too often. I don't think I've ever told this before, like on a podcast or anything. So I'll tell the
Well,
story real
hey,
quick.
no
But
time like the present, Alfred.
I'll give you,
Let's
yeah,
go.
well, because it's actually a great question. I wish we got asked it more, because at any one time we have a list of like 15 or 20 projects that we're interested in making. And a lot of times what happens is it's just like a race to the finish line. Something gets access first, or this is a perfect project to bring to so-and-so. 537 votes. We heard Adam McKay was a fan of Screwball. We started DMing on Twitter. He said, hey, got something, that you might be interested in politically. We said to him, that's how Adam McKay got involved with 537 votes. We had a project right after Cocaine Cowboys. We got approached by a good friend who said, you guys just made the real Scarface, essentially, with Cocaine Cowboys. How'd you like to make the real Casino? And we said, what do you mean? He says, well, Frank Lefty Rosenthal, who is the inspiration for Sam Ace Rothstein, lives in Miami Beach. And he's retired here, and he's around. He's got a website. He does like some handicapping for a Costa Rican sports book, but he's around. Would you be interested in meeting him? So we said, sure. So a meeting is arranged, and we, where does Frank want to go? He wants to go to Joe's Stonecrab. Okay, we'll go to Joe's Stonecrab. We take Frank to Joe's. We have a whole conversation with him. One of my, he's an odds maker, obviously. So one of his favorite stories is Billy asked me, well, how accurate was the movie Casino? And Frank took a second. He said, I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact ratio. He said, the movie was 73% of my life told 65% accurately. And I was like, wow, this guy has really thought about, about this ratio. So he says, we make him a proposal. Let's do this documentary of your life, Frank. He's an older guy, probably late 70s at this point. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. A couple of weeks go by, reach out. Says, Frank, you want to have lunch? Yeah, let's go. Let's go to Prime 112. All right, go to Prime 112. Go to lunch with Frank, have another lunch. He says,
I'll tell you what, Frank, man, he's not a cheap.
Well, Frank knew where to go. So he's like, this is a very interesting idea. He's like, let me give it some more thought. I'll get back to you. Okay, a couple weeks go by. We realize, okay, we're going to have to call him and go to another lunch. So we suggest going to this restaurant, Joe Allen at the time, which was on the other side of Miami Beach. It was like a good diner spot. And we're sitting there with Joe Allen, and Frank, Bill and I are sitting there waiting for him to come in for lunch. And you see him park his Mercedes 500 SL right outside in a towaway zone. And I see him amble on in. I'm thinking to myself, oh no, he's going to have to go and move his car. Frank comes in, it's like, Frank, listen, I saw you park car there. You're in towaway zone. He looks and he says, it's going to take me 20 minutes to. He says, will you move my car for me, put it in another spot? I said, sure, Frank, I'll take his keys. And as I'm walking out of the restaurant, all I could think about was the opening of the movie Casino.
Oh.
And I'm like, I have to go start Frank Lefty Rosenthal's car right now. No. I hope this is going to be right. Everything worked out. We moved his car. We had lunch. He says, let me think about it. We walked away. 4 weeks later, he passed away.
Oh, wow.
And we never got to make the Frank Lefty Rosenthal real Casino documentary. But I did get to publish an obituary for Lefty. The headline that was, Frank Lefty Rosenthal once asked me to start his car for him. And so that was my headline for Lefty's obit. And we never got to make that doc, but probably if you had to ask what it was, the one that got away, that's the one that got away.
That is a really amazing tale. Alfred, before we let you go, is there anything that you guys are working on that's kind of right now top secret, or anything that's come to public light that you can share with us that you and Billy are working on?
There are things we're working on that are top secret.
Okay, there we go. You heard it straight from the source.
The thing is that when you're making a documentary, you don't really want to talk about it till you're at the very end and you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed and you're ready to put it out into the world. Otherwise, it's just, we've hyped things in the past where we like to talk about it as soon as they're ready to go.
Well, that's great. Great to hear. And the storytelling that you guys do, I speak for myself and I think Nick as well. It's just fantastic. Cocaine Cowboys, Broke, Screwball. I'm telling you, go, Nick. I've been telling you for a while now to go watch Screwball.
You're gonna call me out.
How many times have I told you?
Come on, man.
You have not
Get
seen
it on
it
Netflix, Nick. It's probably my favorite of what we've done in a while.
I think Cocaine Cowboys 2 weeks ago. I
really want people watching 537 votes on HBO Max. You You can add another subscription service, folks. Go watch
There
that
you go.
documentary so you kind of get some knowledge about what happened in 2000. Alfred, we really appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you so much for giving us some time.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure.
All right, that was legendary producer Alfred Spellman. Nick, that was fantastic, man. Some of the stories he told, especially about Frank Lefty Rosenthal, and some documentaries that almost could have come to light. But listen, folks, if you get a chance to check out Rakontur Productions and the films that they've made, from Cocaine Cowboys, I've mentioned it a bunch of times, Screwball on Netflix, 537 votes on HBO Max. Check out from the ESPN 30 for 30 catalog. They did Broke, they did The U. There's just so many great stories that have come out of that production company. And Alfred just really let you in tonight on the secret sauce, man, like what a producer does, how they storyboarded some of these ideas. I just thought it was fantastic, man. I'm really appreciative of the time he gave us.
Yeah, Alfred and Billy are both my age. We're all kids of the year 1978. So, they talk. Alfred brings up, like, when we hear the word documentary, people of our age group, and Mike, you fall into this too. There's a certain thing that comes in our head, a certain perception of documentaries, and for anyone who's watched projects from Rakontur, and if you've caught the show today, they are very intentional about thinking of that definition of what we previously have thought of documentaries and stepping back and exploding the equation, and have produced films that are as watchable as just script to film movies.
Oh no, it's a great point, because and even I've been mentioning Screwball a bunch. I mean, they should pay me for some of this promotion, but Screwball is told so well, and I'm glad he told you the story of, like, we had to. These kids have to read scripts, and we got to make sure everything is perfect, because a lot of this stuff, like he mentioned, there's no archival footage. I can't show you what happened between a private conversation of two people. So I've got to get creative. I got to think of a way to tell this story. And I just think that's fantastic. Check out all their documentaries. You can head to rakontur.com to kind of check out everything that they've worked on. They have links from there. But like I mentioned, all the documentaries are available across the streaming services. Speaking of streaming or listening, you can check out our podcast across all the audio platforms. You can watch it on YouTube. Hit subscribe, as Nick is going to smash the button down at the bottom, and follow us. Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok at Can We Please Talk Podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Saveri.
We'll see everybody next time.
To you.